As you will be aware, there's a bit of a dust-up going on in the Middle East right now, and I thought you might be interested in a letter I got from an Israeli subscriber. I wrote to ask how she was, and she wrote back to tell me, oh, well, she gave me a little vignette of life under fire, and she also made a couple of points that hadn't occurred to me and may not have occurred to you, so I thought you might be interested. I'm going to change all the names. Well, I always change all the names, but in this case I'm going to use English names, or names familiar to English speakers anyway, simply because that way it's easier to keep track of people if the names are familiar. And as the story starts, we have this situation. There's Ellen, the person who's writing to me. She has two adult daughters. There's Daisy and Nicola. Daisy is married to Martin, and they have two daughters. And as the story starts, well, as this whole situation starts, the two girls are staying in Nikki's apartment because Martin, their father, has gone to the airport to pick up Daisy, who's been abroad and is due back very late that night. Nikki, by the way, she's divorced and she has a son I'll call Ian. Right, having given you the scenario and introduced you to all the characters, it now just remains for me to tell you that I'm Graniopteryx. And this is the letter. Dear Demi, imagine the feeling of sitting home and learning that in 3 hours you're to experience a barrage of deadly flying objects. This is a first in warfare. I mean, there have been warnings in wars before, but the idea that cruise missiles and deadly UAVs are on their way and from so far away that action cannot be taken yet, that is science fiction warfare. I'll let that sink in. In Britain, we said we had it used to be said we'd get a 4-minute warning on missiles coming from the Soviet bloc. 4 minutes. This is 3 hours. Okay, that's the feeling that prompted me to take these photos from Nicola's laptop while sitting at her place. Okay, so I'll put the pictures she sent me here. They're not that good, but it gives you an idea. I was at Nikki's with Ian and Daisy's with Ian. I was at Nikki's with Ian and Daisy's two children because Martin was on his way to the airport to collect Daisy, who was due in on a flight landing at 11:25 that night. Luckily, she made it to Israel just before the airport shut down, as it was obviously one of the targets. Notices in WhatsApp from the municipality informed us that all local activities and municipal services would be shut on Sunday and Monday. We were all waiting to rush down to the basement shelter in Nick's building, and the feeling was that we were sitting ducks waiting for the Big Bang. Daisy's daughter Alice suddenly said she wanted to go home and sleep in her own bed. You can understand that, can't you? She was there with her aunt and her cousin and her grandmother, but, well, the two girls were with their aunt, their cousin and their grandmother, but they wanted to be home. Even under fire. So she wanted to go home and sleep in her own bed, even though her parents were not yet home. And that's Ellen's, my initial response was, no way. Daisy's place is a semi-detached house. That's in America, it's a condo, 2 houses together with a central wall. And it has its own indoor shelter. All blocks of flats and houses, any dwelling at all in Israel has to have a safe room or an air raid shelter. And this is a solid concrete room with a steel window and a gas filter. So imagine the situation of any place in Britain or America or Australia or New Zealand or wherever you are, where you have to have an air raid shelter in your house. And that air raid shelter, that law has been there for, I don't know what, 20, 30, 40 years. No child would ever know a world in which houses don't have air raid shelters in Israel. And there's a reason for that. As she mentions bombings going on, I'll just explain. On the northern border of Israel, with Lebanon and Syria, I suppose, Iran has parked a terrorist organisation called Hezbollah, and they they just lob shells over randomly. There's no aiming or anything. They just stick them in the firing thing and fire them off. And they land on hospitals, schools, kindergartens, homes, playgrounds, just anything. And they randomly. That's been happening for at least 20 years. And in Gaza, the same thing. They were shelling every day. But Israel had developed this successful Iron Dome shoot out of the sky thing. And so, well, the international community, as well as most Israelis, hardly noticed it. But they were constantly under barrage. So every house has an air raid shelter. So apparently Daisy's place has its own little air raid shelter, whereas Ellen's place, being a block of flats, just has a big air raid shelter in the basement. Okay, Daisy's place is a semi-detached house and it has its own indoor shelter. So from that point of view, the girls would be as safe there as anywhere else. They actually wanted to walk home. It's only a 10-minute walk, but obviously this felt like a crazy idea. When I realised I could not hold them back, I took the two of them in my car and took them home to await the return of Daisy and Martin, checked that everything was okay, instructed them to charge their phones and put water, snacks and food in the shelter. Then I went back to Nikki's. The streets were deserted. Can you blame them? When I got home, I watched TV and felt totally helpless. It was interesting to watch Sky News and CNN and to hear that there was an international effort to stop this international crisis. And it really is an international crisis. And props to America and props to the United Kingdom and also to the Kingdom of Jordan and Saudi Arabia, because they opened their airspace, thus allowing the more high-tech planes of Britain and the Israelis as well to shoot these drones and UAVs out of the air before they got to Israeli territory, because Israeli territory is very small. And by the time they're over Israeli territory, they'd be in the process of landing. So shooting them down before they got there was would have been very much easier. The idea of following the countdown till these armed UAVs arrived, and the cruise missiles too, was unbelievable. Meanwhile, and this is why I explained to you about Hezbollah, regular rockets started flying and the TV screen was full of lists of places where sirens were activated. These are the general, everyday, common or garden rockets coming from Hezbollah and, as I said, and even from Gaza, because Israel hasn't completely cleaned out the system in Gaza either. At a certain point, I felt I had heard enough and decided to go to bed without changing into night clothes to be prepared to go down to the shelter. But instead of sleeping, I ended up checking headlines on my iPhone until I noticed it was after the expected landing time. And the news was that one child was hurt in the south, but no other injuries were suffered. And what I have heard is the child was killed, but then I have heard also that she was just wounded. It was an 8-year-old Bedouin child, a Muslim, an Arab, who was injured by shrapnel. You see, as I said, Israel is quite small, and they had only managed to shoot this particular thing, whatever it was, out of the sky, and the shrapnel fell. I'm assuming it was something like a cruise missile, a very big one, and the explosion and the shrapnel somehow, well, it fell to earth and injured this child, but ironically enough, a fellow Muslim. Today, Ellen continues, I'm quite a zombie, delighted that USA and UK contributed to the military efforts and that the Israeli devices worked so effectively. The Israel aircraft industry has good reason to feel proud of their systems, and the Air Force was fantastic. So there were 3 air forces there, USA, UK, Israel, and they were, you know, sort of like a game of Tetris. And talking about Tetris, I will point something out here. Iran and Russia are like that right now. You remember Tetris was developed in Russia. Iran and Russia were together. Have been together for quite a while. Iran has been supplying Russia with the drones with which it's been bombing Ukraine. Now, a lot of my subscribers write stuff about the waste of money that, sending stuff to Ukraine is. It's not a waste of money. Because what Russia is doing to Ukraine, Iran was trying to do to Israel. Admittedly, maybe a bit more high-tech in the case of Iran, but basically the same thing. And those 2 guys are learning from each other. Now, in the case of Israel, and this is why I suspect that the USA and the UK were so keen to help Israel, this phone here is full of Israeli technology, including the satellite technology. I think most of the satellite technology is run either from Israel or with Israeli expertise. They're really very good at that. And if Israel were to be bombed to powder, most of our satellite systems would close down. And most of this sort of technology would grind to a halt. It would be very bad for the West, which is one reason probably why it was happening. Because Russia and Iran are both trying to destroy the West. So, and they should not be allowed to destroy Ukraine in the same way, because the response on Ukraine has been so bad of late. I'm sure that is what has emboldened Iran. I want you Americans to think about that. So Ellen continues, the threat is not over yet, and tomorrow many things are still cancelled. This is a historic event, a first-time real-life use of hundreds of these deadly flying objects. I hope this is a wake-up call for the world. Well, as I said, it should be a wake-up call. The airport is open this morning, but international airliners are neither coming nor going to Israel. Oh, Ellen. I shall correct that just out of sheer sense of fun. The airport is open this morning, but international airliners are neither coming to nor going from Israel. I just can't help myself. Sorry. What historic time, she says. What a depressing world. Well, yeah, I mean, what Iran did, I'm quite sure if you're waiting for those bombs to drop, yeah, that's depressing. From the point of view of international cooperation and the fact that the Arab states are also waking up to the dangers of this sort of ideological murderousness. That's possibly a hopeful sign as well. As they say, darkest before dawn. I don't think it actually is, but you know, it's a good way of saying that. Now I have some notes here. Yeah, no, nothing. It's sort of interesting because I have an iPhone, and this Ellen, what, 5,000 miles away, however far away she is, she has an iPhone too. That's something about our interconnected world to start with, isn't it? Okay, till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share, share, share.